Now that we're pretty much finished with our array section, we can focus on some other collection types, and we're going to start in this section by focusing on ranges. So we're going to first discuss what ranges are, of course, and then how to create simple ranges of numbers. We're going to start with the basics, which is just going to be a range of whole numbers. And then we're going to take a look at how to access numbers within a specific range. Now, for this, we're going to need a for loop. So hopefully, well, I mean, it'd be better if you have some for loop knowledge. If you don't, then not to worry. We will kind of explain how to use a very basic for loop in this section, and we'll cover it in greater detail in a different section. So we've actually seen a quick example of a range in the previous section where we just used 3 dots and specified a lower and an upper bound. And that's really all there is to specifying a range. We call the lower bound, the 3 dots, and then the upper bound. So if I want numbers from 1 to 10, I'd do it in this fashion here. So important to note that this is inclusive of the numbers 1 and 10 as well. So this will contain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. If we wanted to exclude 10, so we want to exclude the upper bound, we would do something like this. So this would give the numbers 1 to 9, so it stops once it reaches 10 here. So you'll note these are very slightly different types. The first is a countable closed range, and the second is just a countable range. So by closed, it means it contains the upper bound, and otherwise it does not. If we want to examine these in greater detail, we see upper bound being 10 and lower bound of 1. Whereas for this one, we have the lower bound again of 1, and the upper bound is 10, but it is not inclusive of 10. So if we were to print all of these out, then we wouldn't get 10 being printed there. In fact, why don't we do that? Once it comes time to learning how to access numbers within the range, we'll work on printing them all out. For now, we can think about storing these inside some kind of ranges. So I'm going to call this range 1. Okay, and I'm going to call this let's range 2. Now I won't assign specific types to these ranges, as the type is a little weird. If we start typing in range 1, note how it is a countable closed range of integers, okay, countable closed range, and 2 is just a countable range. Now ranges have a lot of the same functionality that arrays do, but a little less than the arrays that we saw previously. So we can get a lot of attributes from a range, such as the count. Let's see if it's actually going to come up with those range 1 is what I should be typing, dot count, okay. We can get stuff like that. We can get dot contains, okay, does it contain a certain element, and so on and so forth. What we can't do is actually add items to it, so there's no add or append, okay, and there's no delete either, alright. Additionally, we can't access items by index like we could with an array. So we try to select range 1 at the index 1, we don't get anything there because it's not an array. Accessing indices is a little different and kind of weird with ranges. And that's why we tend to stick to arrays of numbers. Also, a range will contain all of the numbers from 1 to 10, so if we want to exclude 1 or 2 numbers, we can't really do that using this syntax here. So let's take a look at how to access the numbers within a specific range, seeing as we can't do it via index. Well, for this we're going to need a for loop, so let me just write out the code and then I'll explain what's going on afterwards. So we're going to say for number in range 1, and we're just going to print number. Okay, so this is what's called a for each loop, which means we're saying basically for each of the numbers within range 1, we're just going to print out that number. So this loop essentially runs 10 times, and it starts with number equal to range 1's first value. So that's 1. It prints 1 out, then it will go back up to the top and say, okay, are there any numbers left in range 2? There are. We'll move to the next one. That will be 2. So number equals 2, we're going to print that. Next iteration, we're going to go to range 1, the third value, which is 3, so number equals 3, and then 4, then 5, and so on and so forth until it reaches 10, which is the last number in range 1. We're going to print that out, and then the loop says, okay, no more numbers, so we're just going to exit. So if you take a look at our little console window down here, you do see that we get the numbers from 1 to 10 being printed out. Now this is a little different for our second range, so we go for number in range 2, print number. Okay, and let's just comment this guy out. Okay, and let it run. It's being a little slow right now, but hopefully you guys can see that. Yes, excellent. So we get the numbers from 1 to 9 being printed out this time. And that's because although our upper bound is 10 for range 2, it's not included. So all of the numbers represented in range 2 are, the number 10 is not included in these. 9 is the upper bound. So what if we wanted to print out some, but not all of the elements within a specific range? Well, for that we'd actually need to declare an array, because this is going to print out all of the numbers within the range, so there's limited functionality. So what we would have to do is declare an explicit array of numbers and print that out. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second. I do just want to tell you one more thing about setting up our ranges, and that's the fact that we don't even have to necessarily specify a lower or an upper bound. So if I could say lower than 5 or something, okay, and I set this equal to this range ... 5, this is going to kind of include everything from basically negative infinity up until 5. So this is just going to represent a massive range of numbers with no definite start index. So this makes indexing over these kind of ranges pretty difficult because we don't necessarily know where to start. We could, however, do the opposite. Actually, I'll keep that in, and I'm going to say higher than 5 equal to 6 ... and that's it. So what this is going to do is it's going to get all the numbers from 6 upwards, okay? So this is higher than 5. Okay, this we can iterate over, but we have to be very careful when we're doing something like this, because this will iterate infinitely due to the fact that there is no upper bound. Until we give some kind of explicit end condition to that loop, it will just run and run until our program runs out of memory and eventually crashes. Okay, so we want to be careful when using these kind of infinite ranges. So let's get back to the topic of printing out ranges of numbers within an array. So I'm just going to create a simple number array. Number array is going to be an array of ints, okay, and I'm just going to set this equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now, instead of printing all of the elements, so I could do for number in number array print number. Okay, I don't want to print number array, I just want to print the number, and that's just going to print the numbers 1 to 5. However, I don't necessarily want that. Maybe I only want 3, 4, and 5. So what I could do is I could specify a range right up here. So in this case, what I want is from 3 onwards, okay? And this is going to start at, actually, I guess we actually want index 2 onwards. So we want this number at index 2, 3, and 4, okay? And once it finishes running, we should get 3, 4, and 5 being printed out. We do indeed. Similarly, we could do, maybe we only want 1, 2, and 3. We could just do the 3 dots and we would end at index 2. Okay, so this should just print out 1, 2, and 3 once it finishes running. So we can do pretty much, there we go, 1, 2, and 3 printed. So we can do pretty much the same thing as we did with this less than up here. So let's say I want everything less than 3, and that should give us pretty much the same results here. So 1, 2, and 3 being printed out again. So that actually pretty much concludes our discussion on the topic of ranges. They're a pretty simple thing to work with. Again, not nearly as much functionality as we had with arrays, so for the most part we tend to stick to numerical arrays. Also, it makes skipping elements within a specific range kind of difficult to do, unless we're just printing them out, and then it's pretty easy. We could just do a couple if statements and check to see what the values are. But again, for the most part, we'll stick with numbers. Ranges are just good to know, because we will use ranges every now and again, and it's important to understand at the very least these operators here.